What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Weekly podcast, where we talk everything Iowa State. Coming off a big 30-10 road win against Cincinnati. A lot to talk about there. I mean, we saw success on both sides of the ball, and we saw Iowa State get its first road win in, well over a year. First conference road win since 2021. So definitely a big win for the Cyclones.
Yeah, and I think you're really stressing the thing that's most important to not only, the coaching staff, but more importantly, the players. That's one thing that Rocco Beck talked a lot about afterwards is it's so nice just kind of getting that road win, not exactly out of the way, but just, I guess, maybe getting that monkey off their back of, are they going to win a road game this year? They didn't at all last season, and just being able to do that, especially against a new Big 12 opponent going into Cincinnati. And personally, great game all around. And the players just seemed really like that was the big thing that they wanted to do, is just get that first road win out of the way. Yeah,
I think that was a big question coming in was, can this team actually win on the road? Because we saw the whole conference season go by with no road win last year. And then they went into Ohio, and you're like, well, this is going to be the time when they pick it up. And then they lose there. And then, of course, they lose to Oklahoma. That's not too unexpected, but, still being, not having a win in over a year is definitely something that was probably on their minds and maybe a factor in why they played so well.
Yeah, and that win, getting that win against Ohio would have been nice. That would have been a road win, but more importantly, this is a conference road win, and it put them solely in second position of the Big 12, which they still sit at. And I just think that, for them to go out and do that, and in Cincinnati, we were there, just kind of the environment at the start seemed like, that because Cincinnati was also a team that had been struggling in their first year at the Big 12, and it seemed like a game that, both sides really needed it, but Iowa State all around was the better team in the matchup.
Yeah, and we can talk about the atmosphere of Cincinnati for a little bit. No hate to Cincinnati. Yeah. That it was kind of a weird stadium. I didn't expect, the fans to really stay along too long for that game, just because, if your team's getting blown up by 20, you probably want to get out of there as fast as possible too. But maybe you were told just, how that atmosphere is going to be, and we were told it's going to be a tough game because of the atmosphere. And then when we really got there, it didn't seem like it was anything too crazy. Like it was definitely no Oklahoma. So I think that might have played into it. Is Iowa State, they got the momentum rolling early, and when, the atmosphere is still not really playing too much favor into the home team, I think they really just took advantage of that and just rolled with it.
Right. And, for them, especially for Iowa State, this is Cincinnati. They scheduled this game against Iowa State as their homecoming game. So for them to go out there and get that first win when they play Cincinnati, this was actually the first meeting between Iowa State and Cincinnati in school history. So, for them to go in there and enemy territory and pretty much just silence the crowd after that second quarter. I mean, you're looking at it, it was a 17-7 ball game going into halftime, but the rain starts to come down. You're thinking some fans are like, all right, you're probably going to lose this, so let's kind of get out of here early. And but it was, I think the overall atmosphere was cool. It was nice to be in a different city and see what their kind of atmosphere is like on campus. It was one of the few stadiums that I've been to where the stadium is in the middle of campus, which I'm not sure about how you feel about it, but personally I thought it was a little interesting.
I would say I'm not the biggest fan of like a stadium in the center of campus, because it was kind of weird walking past like classrooms and like buildings, and you're walking out of the game and you'll see a kid who's walking past you who's going to the library. And they had the press conference in a rec center classroom. Like, it's just that's where the rooms are, it is kind of like a weird vibe, but, I could also see how interesting it can be, just because, you could, literally go from studying on campus, just the game, and then just hop literally 2 steps over to the rec center right away if you wanted to, which, that could make for a fun day, I suppose.
But overall, it was a good time in Cincinnati. We can get more to that later, but more on kind of the Cyclones and their performance. One thing I really want to hit first is Rocco. I think he had a pretty efficient game. The past couple of games, especially in Oklahoma, he has that 2 interception game. And then even in the win against TCU, it's not like he was the best part of that game. And it looked more like a game that, obviously they relied more on the run game. But this looked like a game where I think this is what Iowa State wants to do for every game. Have the running game be a complement, not have them be the one that wins the game, but to really rely on their talented receiver room, which has really come into it, especially with one guy, Jaden Higgins.
Oh yeah, he was definitely the big baller of the day, if you'll say. But I mean, Rocco finished with 241 yards, with most of those being to Jaden Higgins. I mean, that dude was just catching every ball that was thrown at him. I think it was highlighted by that 75-yard run that he had, or catch and run that he had on the sideline. It is surprising to me that he didn't have a touchdown, which you would think a guy who puts up 172 yards would have a touchdown, but I mean, hey, he got his a couple weeks ago, or a couple weeks into the season. So
right, yeah, and he was making plays all over the place. You talk about that 75-yard catch and run down the sideline, but then he's making diving catches down the middle of the field, making I think it was the third quarter, he had a 30-yard running catch, just showing off that yak ability that he has. And him really just having that game, it just really proves that this is a receiver room that, outside of guys like Jalen Knoll, and relying more on the tight ends as well, that connection between Rocco's had a couple games now where he connects with Knoll really well in that Oklahoma State game, and then now with Higgins in the Cincinnati game. I think that just shows how versatile the wide receiver room can be, because even after you look at that, Jalen Knoll, 3 catches for 24 yards, and that's really it. All the other catches are going to the tight ends there. So really, I think that was kind of a huge question mark, is how this receiver room was going to be, especially in Big 12 play. But really, they've showed that they're capable of, being those guys in an underrated room.
Yeah, and when one guy doesn't step up to, or the person you would expect to step up, probably Jalen Knoll, somebody else definitely comes along and just picks up the slack. Jaden Higgins was kind of struggling at the start of Big 12 play, and then we saw Daniel Jackson explode to just out of nowhere. And then, he's kind of taken a back seat where Jaden Higgins has now picked up his reps. So it does seem like there's a lot of weapons, a lot of capable players that, can fill in when they need to.
Right. And, you talk about Daniel Jackson, another guy, Dimitri Stanley. I think those are really 4 capable wide receivers that are, they're able to play really good ball in this conference. So, there might be a day where we see Dimitri Stanley pop off. Maybe Daniel Jackson has another, 2 touchdown game. And, we're just going to have to see what happens there. But more kind of just on Beck's performance, I think he did a really good job of sitting in the pocket and going through his progressions. I think that's why he was able to find Jaden a lot more, is because he wasn't really just focusing on one guy. There were a couple times, he just looks at, maybe it's either Jaden or Jalen Knoll or like Easton Dean, and you have a couple almost turnover worthy plays from Beck, but overall just a really solid game from him. I think, what do we got here? 241 yards, 2 touchdowns. So
can't really complain with that.
Exactly. An efficient game from him. And again, like I said, kind of making up for the run game, which was solid in parts, but overall not really one that the Cyclones could rely on all game long.
Did want to talk about Beck's performance on the ground, because it seemed like he did go to his feet quite a bit. And he talked about it afterwards, where he was before the game, he knew that he needed to be able to maybe find situations where he can create runs, as opposed to just, taking sacks or throwing incomplete passes, because, he did, of course, 10 runs for 12 yards is not that much, but it is more than, 0. So, I mean, being able to show that he can use his feet and be a threat in the air, on the ground, I think that's a good thing going forward. I think at this point now, he just needs to maybe dial back and find the correct times to run the ball, as opposed to, just running just whenever he can't find an option. Right.
And a couple of those plays seemed a little predetermined from the play calling perspective. There were a couple runs that did look like they did work out, a couple runs to the outside for first downs. But I agree with what you're saying. It's all about, and this is the growing pains of a young quarterback. Just, I think he's really putting the pieces together of when he eventually returns next year as the starter going into the season. But, we've seen him games where he looks like he can't be a starter. He throws bad picks, We've also seen games where he pops off for 3 touchdowns. And now I think we've seen a happy medium game with him, 15 for 25, 241 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then using his legs on the ground. I think that's just, and especially with Matt Campbell and Nate Shieldhaas's offense, if you're on like a 3rd and 6 and you're in your opponent's territory, if you can run for 4 yards, make it a 4th and 2, more than often, they're probably going to want to run a play there. And I think there was a couple times, I believe at one point, Iowa State was like, I want to say they were like 2 for 5 on 3rd downs, but they were 2 and 2 on 4th downs. They converted a couple of really good 4th down plays in this game. And overall, just like you're saying, a solid performance from Becht. And I think, like I said, it's just getting the pieces together as a young starting quarterback.
Yeah, and his youth did show through a little bit. You saw those picks that he almost had.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were, I counted at least 3, probably 4 that probably should have been interceptions, but he did luck out a little bit. And props to him for going for those balls, but you also want to see him be a little bit more careful, especially just because of how he is the efficient quarterback, as opposed to some of the past quarterbacks that have just tried to make plays happen whenever they could.
Right. And I've talked about on this podcast that, Matt Campbell, and I mean, this is any team, but really it feels like Matt Campbell does a really good job of not giving up a lead. And on a couple of those, almost interceptions, those were on drives where the Cyclones end up scoring. And those are just possessions that you don't want to give up, because if you keep it a 10-7 ball game or a 17-7 ball game, those are going to be opportunities that Cincinnati jumps on you and takes advantage of it. So good job on, obviously, like you said, it's just a learning process with those throws, but you'd like to see him, take his chances when it's appropriate to. But overall, like I keep saying, just a solid performance from Becht, and it's obviously a good one to end on before this bye week starts for them.
Yeah, that's true. And you also brought up the fourth down plays that they had successfully. There was that one drive where they converted on 2 of them, highlighted by Chase Contreras, who, I mean, I didn't know that kid could run like that, but I mean, hey, they designed that play before, the game came up, and it presented itself early on, and I think that probably was the big reason that they had so much momentum going into the rest of the game, and why they pretty much pulled out a 20 points road win there.
Right. And it, you talk about that play especially. I mean, great run from Contreras. We were watching it back, and it looks like he almost gets slipped up like right when they decide to option it to him. But he
shakes off a defender like right away, which if that dude gets his hand on him, then we're probably sitting here talking about it. Well, not this play. Yeah. Maybe not even a win this big.
Right. And credit to Chase Contreras, because I was like, this kid's a big dude for a kicker, but I'm not. Yeah. He was pretty fast. I thought, honestly, there was a couple players. I think it was Jaden Higgins that said I thought he was going to run it in himself, but he got tripped. He gets the first down. That's all that matters. And I have it right here that Iowa State was 3 for 3 on 4th downs in this game, and 5 for 15, which not great, but again, a win is a win. But I'll just say that what I meant to say was, a trick play like that, and then it really just seemed like all over the place, or all over the game, Nate Shieldhaas and Matt Campbell were pretty much opening up the playbook, and whatever they were doing worked for them, especially in the passing game. It seemed like when they needed a big play, they got those big plays, and like I mentioned, the run game worked when it needed to and complemented Becht's play. But it just seemed like this was probably one of the better games that Iowa State has had offensively, and they're most consistent throughout the game.
And that was probably why they decided to go for the 4th down there, is because they realized that the offense was driving so well. And, they could have just taken the 3 points, and 7-3 at that point. So they would have just been down by 1. But I think they realized that if they had gotten that 4th down, they probably would have scored there, which they ended up doing. So, I mean, it just shows, maybe the more variety from Nate Shieldhaas too, which, is a good thing to see.
And they also, that was on like their 6-yard line. And, you talk about them. It was early in the game. You choose to go for it. But they also knew that their defense, again, had stepped up, gotten a interception on. Was it the first drive of the game that they got that?
Yeah, TJ
Tampa got that interception on. But yeah, they knew that this was going to be a game that their defense was going to dominate. So they were like, all right, well, we'll go for it. And obviously you agree with the decision now. But overall, I think as a decision to go for it on that fourth down, it was a wise choice, especially, like I said, with how the defense had played. And they played like that all day. I mean, you hold a team to 10 points on the road, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a win.
Yeah.
I think it was, I want to go back to talking to the players afterwards about that Chase Contreras run. I think Jaden Higgins was probably my favorite. He had a funny reaction. He was on the sideline already when that play was happening. He didn't know what was going on. So when he heard pretty much the crowd just go wild with that, they were like, oh, this is happening. He was like, uh-oh, we just got another kick blocked. That's tough. And then when he turned around to see that, he has to go back out on the field, I think that's pretty funny. He even said that, just throw Chase Contreras out there at the running back. Kind of looks like a running back.
Might as well. I mean, we can see what old Chase Contreras has in the backfield, a little wildcat option play. We don't know what will happen, but I kind of had that similar experience because they obviously got stopped on third down. And I was writing up a tweet. I'm like, all right, Chase Contreras is going to probably nail this through because,
it's kind of money between
that
part of the field.
Again, special teams player of the week for the second week of the season. But I'm writing up my tweet. I'm like, all right, Chase Contreras, 35-yard field goal, whatever. As soon as I can even get done before that happens, I'm like, oh. They got a first down.
It's like, oh, he still has the ball.
Select all, delete right there. Not doing that. But yeah, just great. I mean, just an awesome play. I mean, especially seeing Matt Campbell and Nate Schloss, knowing really when to go for it on fourth down. Like I said, you have the momentum. Your defense is playing great. So, yeah, I mean, I was really surprised, but I mean, surprised in a good way, I guess.
Yeah, and rewinding a bit to the first part of that drive, I think you also talk about, going for it on fourth down. They went for it on fourth down earlier. Cartavius Norton had that run where I think we were all expecting him to make it to the end zone or at least get pretty far down the field, but, a little bit of a teammate issues there as Easton Dean tackled him to the ground.
Yeah, if you go back and look at, I mean, I saw it in real time. I could not believe it, but well, first of all, I couldn't believe that Cartavius Norton was the back that they decided to go with on fourth down. I figured they would have chosen Sanders.
And then he broke out that run, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, okay. So, Cartavius Norton, welcome back for the second week in a row, actually playing really good ball, so that's good. I think we heard something about he had been banged up in the beginning of the season too, so probably just nursing that injury. But yeah, he breaks it up the middle, and I'm thinking, all right, well, Cyclones are going to get like a 45-yard touchdown right here, and Easton Dean's ahead of him. And I knew what Easton Dean was trying to do. He's trying to set up a block downfield, but he ends up kind of just pushing Norton on the ground, and you're inside I'm pretty sure he gets inside the red zone there, but I was like, oh, well, I think Easton Dean just kind of tripped up his own teammate.
Yeah, he was, Easton Dean was in front of him, of course, but you have a defensive player, running at him over here, and, Norton can't go this way because he has another defensive player. So he's like, okay, well, scoot over a little bit. I'm gonna move over and block this guy for you. But instead of, lightly touching him or boosting him forward, he just slapped him right down on the ground.
Right on the back of his jersey. And I wish that we would have got one of them for that, for the post-game interview, because I would have asked them just a little funny question about that. And we didn't have a press conference today, so it didn't ask me.
Yeah,
so
we'll see if they still remember it next week.
Yeah, or if I do, I mean, at this point, I might just forget about it and be like, all right, I'm on to Baylor. I'm on to thinking about what they're going to do on the road against Baylor. So.
Yeah. And I think, we'll talk about Norton here. We also look at the rest of the run game. You talked about we expected Sanders to do that. I think it is interesting that the run game I want to say they did well because the group as a whole averaged more than what they usually do. I think the three running backs were around a little over 4 yards a carry total. But Sanders really has pushed himself to the top of that running back room.
Yeah, Sanders, I mean, he's really proven himself as the premier back in the running back room. But, this was a good game that, like I said, the running back room was solid when they needed to be. But for Cartavius Norton to have that big run on 4th down, looks like that ended up being, his longest was for 20 yards. And then Carson Hansen getting in there too. 5 carries, 25 yards. I feel like this is probably like the 3rd game in the row where Carson Hansen has gotten around 20 plus yards on his 5 carries. So, again, just fleshing out that, I keep calling him the Swiss Army knife of a running back room that they have. And honestly, I think it's really good because now, you have this like essentially 3-headed and almost 4-headed monster, which I didn't even realize that Abu Sama wasn't even there.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if he wasn't there.
Before the game, he was questionable to come in.
Yeah.
And then I think it was a game time decision by Matt Campbell, like, something happened in practice, so let's hold him out for a little bit here.
Yeah. And it's not a bad idea because, now he got that week to sit out, and then he has this bye week. He essentially has almost, 21 days to get ready for this next game on the road against Baylor. So, the more time that you can give a true freshman who's proven himself as one of the best running backs in the room, and you can still get away getting, averaging like 4 yards a carry with your 3 running backs that have been solid all year. By means do it. So it ended up working out for him. But all 3 of those guys that I mentioned, Sanders, Norton, Hansen, they've all been doing a really good job. And like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, just complimented Beck's play as well.
Yeah, and I really like what I'm seeing so far from Carson Hansen, true freshman, or believe true freshman. I'll
look at it real quick.
And he really doesn't play like somebody who is, touching the field for the first time. I was told he was, like a bowling ball, more just push forward, but he is a little shifty for a guy that is as powerful as him. So I think it is good to see him, getting some work in too.
Yeah, true freshman out of Lakeville, Minnesota. So
nice. Yeah, two true freshmen in there that are already pretty much getting a good amount of reps. That's kind of good to see, especially when they need people to step up.
It would be interesting to see. So I see he's 6'2", 210 right here. It'd be interesting to see if maybe Iowa State uses him kind of more like a fullback or like a tight end type deal, because I agree with you. When I see him run, I see him more like a bowling ball, or like that, you need maybe like 3 or 4 yards, just run it up the middle. And you can do that now with the offensive line, which the offensive line has gotten so much better in the run game. It is, Brennan Black, I don't know, we mentioned him a lot. I don't know if he's the only guy that stepped up, but I really want to ask, whether it's Nate or one of the offensive linemen or Matt Campbell, just what has been that big difference? Because it really just looks like they're hitting their blocks, they're playing more physical. But yeah, they have just stepped it up the past couple of games, and it really surprised me because I thought this was going to be an all-year issue for Iowa State.
Yeah, and then they had Jake Remsburg come back last week, so I think that was also a big plus. Maybe not so like him just being on the line, but also just him being, active in the game, and him being able to be that senior guy that's making the rest of the line better. So, just the whole run game as a whole just seems to be getting better each week. And I think if they want to compete in the Big 12 and they want to get to a bowl game, they're going to have to continue improving that run game.
And last thing I want to mention about the offense is Jalen Knoll, who, I already mentioned he had the 3 catches for around 24 yards, I think it was.
Yeah.
But really what stood out to me is his best 2 returns of the season so far. He gets that one that I believe was 38, and then he opens up the 3rd quarter when the rain starts. So they're only up at by 10 at that point.
A kickoff
in
the rain.
Exactly. But, I was like, oh, well, let's see what happens. He had that 38-yard one before, and then he goes off for 72 yards to open up the 3rd quarter. That was out of nowhere. I'm sorry, Jalen Knoll. I did not know you had that in you. I feel like that meme where the guy was like, whatever he says, is like, I did not know your ways, or I did not know you could ball that. I was very surprised with Jalen Knoll in the return game. Yeah,
and I feel like you see his speed and you see like what he can do when he has the ball, as a receiver. I feel like you get him out into an open field, he's going to beat pretty much everybody. Right. And that's what we saw. I feel like he just kind of like ran out of steam there on that 72-yard. He started on the opposite end of the field and had to wrap back around everybody to run up the sideline, and just, he pretty much ran like 120 yards on that play. So
yeah,
I don't blame them for slowing down there at the end. But 110 total,
110 total
return yards, almost 150 just total yards for the day. I mean, it doesn't matter if he's quiet in the receiving game if he's also going to put up 150. I mean, him and Higgins combined for over 300 total yards in the day, which is crazy.
Yeah, and that helps. It's for this game. It's one of those aspects where like that helps getting those averaging 55 yards on a return. But in a game coming up where you're gonna, and not saying that the next couple games like Baylor and Kansas are way different than playing Cincinnati, but it is going to help you in a game where maybe against Texas, maybe you're opening up the third quarter down by a couple touchdowns, getting them right in scoring position to open up the third quarter. I mean, right now it's one of those aspects where, that was nice, but I feel like down the road, it's going to be one of those where it really helps out this offense, especially with, we praise Becht in the running back room, but they're still getting better. And that's something that Matt Campbell's talked a lot about is the growth of the offense. And they're still, I think, they obviously haven't hit a ceiling yet, and they're just still on the projection of getting better, especially with how young they all are.
Yeah. You talk about the importance of that ability to, I guess, get down the field on returns, and I'm a big advocate on the punt game. I love watching punting. It's almost as good to me as defense. But field position is everything, and it will be everything going forward. I think if they can have good field position and they can figure out how to give their opponent bad field position, it'll set up a lot more opportunities because it's putting your offense under less stress, especially with how young they are and they're still growing. It puts them under less stress to be forced to drive the ball 75 yards down the field. Instead, it's like, here's a fresh set of downs with, you have 20 yards to go. You have 3 good plays, you're in the end zone, as opposed to, okay, you have to somehow figure out how to do like 14 plays to get there.
Right. And, you talk about like field positioning and everything. Now that I think about it, the defense has done a really good job, especially these last couple of games, not just getting them turnovers, which they are now with the 2 picks that we'll talk about later. They now have 12 interceptions on the year, which is crazy to me, but getting that field position. When they're forcing punts, Iowa State's starting, I mean, I know it's not that big of a deal, but instead of starting on your 25-yard line, you're starting maybe at your 30, your 35. That's a lot better, especially with your quarterback that is still growing. I mean, how you don't really see very often, especially in Iowa State's wins, them starting after a kickoff. Yeah. So I think that just helps them out a lot. Like you said, field positioning. And, I think it's, this defense does a lot more than just get turnovers. They have been amazing on forcing them into punts in the last, all season, but especially these last 3 games.
And I think that comes with the, how just the whole group plays. I think you see the defensive backs, of course, are really good, but this D-line, they're swapping in and out like this. There's pretty much 2 different looks that they have with different players that are on the line rushing. And their knowledge of knowing when to put these players on to create the most pressure is something that's honestly really cool to see. So it's, them being able to put, I guess, the opposing teams' offenses in just like tough scenarios and, forcing them to make bad plays. I think that is one thing that is creating all those turnovers. You talk about the 12 picks. I think that kind of starts from the D-line as well.
Yeah, and the defensive line, I like that you mentioned that because a couple good swaps that I've seen, especially these last couple of games, is when they're swapping out our friend of the show, J.R. Singleton, and Dom Orange. When they're swapping out, I think, like you said, they're doing a really good job of knowing when to do that. And then especially Gary Vaughn, who in this game, the stat sheet might not show it, but he was in on a lot of tackles. Malik Verdun had a really good game, especially in open field tackling. Did a great job there. And that's one thing that we've talked about personally is that I personally don't really love the, what is it? 3, what do we got? 3, 4, 5 or whatever they usually, 3, 4, 5.
3, 3, 5.
Yeah, 3, 3, 5. I don't typically like that from Iowa State because I think something that does hinder them is their ability to, they don't always do a great job of getting to the quarterback. And I feel like if they just had one more guy rushing, but these, especially in this game against Emory Jones, they were making him move out of the pocket a ton. Yeah. So even though they're not getting the sack, and that's something that JR said, is like, it may look easy, but trying to get him down, but they're a lot faster. But regardless, like I said, they did a great job of forcing Emory Jones out of the pocket, and the stat sheet may not show it, but this D line has done a great job of, getting to opposing quarterbacks these last couple of games.
Mm-hmm. And I think that almost like helps them out a little bit, not getting the sacks, because, instead of creating sacks, they're almost creating opportunities for turnovers, and I think that almost is a good thing just for helping out the defensive backs, as opposed to getting a sack and then, maybe on the next play, the opposing quarterback completes a big pickup anyways. But I also, you talk about Emory Jones. I think they were struggling a little bit early on to contain him, but I think it was probably like the second quarter, honestly, when they started locking down, and instead of like giving up a big play to him every other time he touched the ball, it was pretty much like once a quarter at that point. And I think that like growth during the game is something that was also pretty cool to see.
Right. And especially when the offense takes a lead the way that they did, obviously you can't, Cincinnati couldn't rely on Emory Jones running up the middle or using running backs as blockers. Like you said, he still had a decent game on the ground. It's going to be hard to stop him all day long, but when they forced him to throw, I mean, he couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at the stats even, like he less than 100 yards in the air.
Right.
He just could not get anything going.
Which that was the biggest thing to me was, this defense has been great. We've talked about them all year, whether it's forcing turnovers, doing a great job on the run, but you hold an offense to under 100 passing yards on the road. You force 2 picks. That's crazy. And I know, this is Cincinnati. They're not a great team so far in Big 12 play, but regardless, Matt Campbell has talked a lot about how this is one of the youngest teams in college football, and for them to go out there and do that on the road, prove themselves, hold a team to under 100 yards passing and just a little over 100 yards on the ground, I mean, that's crazy. And we can talk about the picks real quick. I mean, TJ Tampa on their first drive of the game. I mean, do you want to give us a little insight on Tampa Island?
Yeah. Oh, I love that Tampa Island. I mean, he's just who he is. I mean, he's one of the best corners in the nation, and he shows that every single week. I think it's pretty much the same thing with like Revis Island. I mean, he wasn't getting a lot of picks, but that's because nobody wants to throw at him. Because if you do, we saw what happened in the first drive of the game. He's gonna get to the ball,
right?
Or he's gonna make a play on the ball. He's gonna, even if it's not the person he's defending, he's still gonna somehow make a play on the ball. And I think that's just one thing that makes him as good as he is.
Right, and you mentioned that. That's great, especially on that pick. That's not even exactly his man. You can't. That's one there that you even throw in his direction, and he has time to make an adjustment on the ball. I believe it's a full extension interception on that too. Yeah. And, that's a huge, like, not even just obviously a drive stopper, but a huge momentum shift on the first drive of the game when you can get your offense inside the 20-yard line. I mean, I was just blown away by that. And I like how you mentioned Darrelle Revis, because he really is kind of, his stats, he has 2 picks on the year, which for a corner, 2 picks isn't anything to scoff at. But when you talk about, one of the best corners in the league, you're thinking that he's getting an interception every game. Stats aren't really all what it's about. It's really about, he on PFF, I think he was graded the 6th or 7th highest graded corner, which you could say whatever you want about PFF. Maybe their grades aren't the greatest, but I mean, it's really what you said. He does not get the ball thrown his way a lot, and he proved why on that first drive of the game.
And I think he complements his other corners well too. You look at, obviously the only other person with a pick on the day was Cooper, but I think all the other ones were just still like all over the field, keeping the balls out of the air. There's a reason that Emory Jones couldn't get over 100 passing, is because it wasn't just Tampa. It was like everybody else was just making plays out of nowhere.
Yeah, and like another ability that he has, and when he does have to make a tackle, I mean, how many times have we looked at each other like, oh my, TJ Tampa with a nasty hit? And I think that's something he's kind of spread on to Miles Purchase, who has also played pretty solid. He's both, I think the 4 guys in the DB room that really stick out to me that have all had their fair share of really good moments. They've also had their fair share of giving up big plays. That's Bo Freeler, Miles Purchase, Jeremiah Cooper, and TJ Tampa. Overall, throughout the season, they have played really well. Like you said, Jeremiah Cooper getting that another pick in this game, and I believe he's tied with one other person.
Yeah, there's a kid, I think from Kentucky, who also has 5, but still, only one of 2 people in the nation with 5 picks.
Exactly, and like I was saying, they all have had their games where they give up a big play or 2, but I think it's their ability to rebound, especially mid-game, to get those big tackles, and that was a big emphasis in the press conference last week, is focusing on open field tackling, and I think that's something that they did a really great job of. And again, and another guy, Malik Verdun, had a lot of huge tackles in this game.
It seems like Verdun was like playing with violence against Cincinnati. He was all over the field. He was fast to the ball, and he was not like laying it easy on them. I think he probably had like 3 hits that game where I was just like, oh my God, who's that? I'm like, oh, yep, number 7. Cool.
And like you said, those couple big hits, he had 5 tackles on the day, and 2 of those being solo tackles. So again, just wrapping up in open space. The leading tackler was Freeler with 9. He had 4 solo tackles and a TFL. Yeah. I mean, this defense, it is starting to be just like Iowa State of old, where they have guys everywhere, and maybe not so much on the defensive line, but in that DB room, I mean, they got guys that can pick you off or make a play in the backfield, which is just crazy to me.
And we were like kind of talking about their tackling issues the week before against TCU. Of course they beat TCU, but they could not tackle some parts of the game. They could not tackle to save their lives. And I think going into this game, that was the one thing that I noticed right away. I was like, this team is tackling so much better, and that week-to-week adjustment is something that if they carry it over into the rest of the season, I think they'll probably be good.
Right. And you talk about, week-to-week adjustment, what do you think Iowa State really needs to do to kind of take advantage of this extra week that they can do? I mean, the sun is shining bright when you get a win, especially on the road.
That's true.
But there are definitely still some areas that Iowa State needs to make up for or mop up. And one of those I really think is still trying to get that consistent run game, because, again, if, you're going to go up against teams like Baylor and, Kansas, who have, they've had a fair share of games where they've given up a lot of yards and whatnot, whether it be in the pass and run game, but still just what do you really think this offense still needs to do to kind of grow throughout the game?
That is a good question, because I feel like there's, they are playing well, but I also feel like there are a lot of areas that still need work. And I think for me, I still want to see more from the offensive line, because I think obviously we have the last couple weeks where the run game has been improving. And I think, obviously Rocco Becht is still sitting pretty in the pocket. He's not getting sacked. But I do want to see them like create more of those big plays, because it seems like just maybe a few times a game we'll see a big run breakout, as opposed to them being able to push like a couple yards up. I want to see them create just big holes for the running backs to go through, because those plays where Abu Sama, for example, like ran past for a touchdown, I feel like they have the potential to do that every week or multiple times a game even.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with you on the offensive line, because I think the offensive line, they haven't really been doing much with them. And so, they've had a couple, really good plays like that Abu Sama run in the TCU game where it's all about hitting your second block. But I think it'd be awesome to see if they can use them in running back screens. I mean, I know they did a lot of wide receiver screens to Xavier Hutchinson last year, which I was not a big fan of. But especially when you have, 3, even 4 running backs that have showed their shiftiness, why not get your offensive line out there and make some big blocks, not only at the line level, but especially at the linebacker level. I think with how versatile this offensive line is, and just really how they prove themselves as like these really like physical downhill blockers, I think that using them in like a running back screen would work a lot would work really well for them.
Especially because I think we talk about their strength a lot, but I also think they are pretty quick guys too. So I think they definitely could be used well in any sort of screenplay.
Right. And not even just running back screens, but also with the run game, I still really want to see it be a little bit more dynamic, because I still think that there is a lot of just run up the middle. I mean, get Abu Sama like a stretch play. Like I just don't, or something like give them just a little bit. I just wish overall for these next couple of games, I want to see them go a little bit more deep into that run game, because it really seems the only times they ever go like do stretch plays is when they do it on the do it in the red zone or inside like the 10-yard line.
Yeah, where you would kind of like expect them to.
Right, which, it's been good. Run outside, you're obviously playing with the shorter field trying to get into the end zone, but I don't know, just I think, having a stretch play once you get into enemy territory would, set up plays really well. But that's really all I want to see, because I think, you can't really ask too much of Beck to get any better, especially in a season where, again, he's still growing. And the defense, I mean, I think this is just another complete game from them all around.
Yeah. And going into the bye week, we talk about the offense. What do you think there are areas to improve on the defense? And then I guess what would those be? I
mean, I think at the defensive level, you would love to see the defensive line get more pressure on the quarterback. There hasn't really been a ton of sacks, but like you also mentioned, what they make up for, or what they lack in their, getting to the quarterback and getting a sack on him, they make up for, in the secondary. I guess, just trying to focus more on the defensive line and get, blow up plays like that. Run defense has been great. But really, I think the main focus for the Cyclones should be, making sure that, you contain the quarterback, because in a couple weeks, you're playing Jason Bean, who, has showed his ability as a runner. And I think that could be a huge problem for them. And then just a week later, you got Texas at home with Quinn Ewers, who's going to be the best quarterback they faced since Dylan Gabriel. And if they let, Ewers torch them the way that they let Dylan Gabriel, it's probably going to chalk it up to another loss for the Cyclones.
It's going to be a long day.
Yeah.
And I think where I would improve, you talked about the defensive line. I almost want to see the linebackers get more active, maybe in like the middle of the field, because we see like a lot of the linebackers do a lot at pressuring the quarterback.
Yeah.
And then we see a lot of the DBs do a lot at either tackling big runs or getting the picks. But, I mean, I want to see, we saw Will McLaughlin get a pick. I want to see some of the other one. I want to see Gary Vaughn get a pick.
Right.
I want to see them stopping plays 2 to 3 yards up as opposed to letting up 8 yards on a play or just knocking the ball out of the air. You know, I think there is room for improvement in the middle of the field. And I think that starts with the linebackers.
Yeah, and especially, I'm looking at the stats right here now, just quickly reminding me, I think it would be nice to get Gary Vaughn. I know he just really is still probably recovering from that injury, but, I think he is probably at his best when you mostly put him on the line and you kind of help him out with that defensive line group. But, the leading tackler as a linebacker is Caleb Bacon with 29. And for a walk-on, redshirt freshman, to be doing that, I mean, that's crazy. And, he's been that real coverage guy, but then you have to go all the way down, probably like 5 players where Will McLaughlin is at with, 22 tackles. He's got a sack, and just like you mentioned, that pick. I really just want to see, kind of like you said, the linebackers helping out in the pass game, or really just making a presence known more for themselves, because I feel like it really is just 2 groups, your defensive line and the DBs that have been making big plays, but that linebacker group, needs to help out a lot, and, especially in the run game, which, like I said, it's been great, but I think the linebackers can be a lot of help so that the DBs don't have to come down and make a huge tackle, and you're not relying on guys like Bo Freeler and Miles Purchase to make big tackles, open field tackles.
Yeah, because it seems like those are really the big ones. Once they break through, it seems like Freeler's the guy who's going to wrap them up. And I do think the linebackers are doing good stuff. They're the ones that are creating a good amount of sacks as well. It really is just like that middle of the field that, these guys aren't on the defensive line per se. And I know Iowa State does play them, on the defensive line a good amount, just because it is a 3-3-5. It is, it's a weird scheme, but I think letting them drop back a bit might benefit them too. Just stopping a lot of those like bigger runs, I want to say. Yeah,
because it feels like in the past game when it has worked, it's when the quarterback, he's getting pressure, but he rolls out, and then there's someone maybe like 5 or 6 yards down the field where they can make a play. Where I feel like if a linebacker's there, not that I would love to always have a linebacker in coverage on a wide receiver.
That's true.
But it's just a little bit of help, especially, when you can have that, you can cover that middle of the field really well, which, like I said, I think Iowa State has let up a couple big plays on middle of the field plays, or just, those short middle gains, like anywhere from 5 to 8 yards. I think they've kind of struggled on that a couple times, but I think really we might be asking a little bit too much, because this is probably the best that Iowa State has looked all season long.
Yeah, so we talked about like what the Iowa State needs to work on going into this bye week. I think we should also discuss like the top players so far, because we are kind of like midway through the season, or a little bit over midway. And there has been quite a few players that I think have surprised me, but also players that maybe I've expected them to do well, but they have lived up to their expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised. I'll just shout out now Eli Sanders. I've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast, but he's really stepped up into that RB1 role, which, and then Matt Campbell, I asked him kind of about it, and he commended Sanders because, he didn't really have a big role in this offense last year. He didn't see a lot of time on the field. He was dealing with injury. It could have been really easy for him to transfer. But for him to stick around and just have a big role in this offense, I think that's awesome. He's been really good for that running back room, just kind of a shifty player, making moves in space, and he's been really good. And then defensively, obviously the stars are Jeremiah Cooper and, TJ Tampa, but I want to give a lot of credit to Bo Freeler, because you mentioned it a little bit, that he just seems like that guy that he's always going to be able to make that tackle, if they give up a big play. But, I think he's been a great, safety for the team, and also just kind of serves the role as the middle linebacker and a leader on the defense in general.
And when I talk about offense, I think the guy that really sticks out to me as the top player has been Jalen Knoll, because it seems like every week he's on the field, he makes big plays, whether that is in the receiving game, which he has pretty much every week, or then this last week where he wasn't big in the receiving game, but he also like went off in the return game. I think he's been one of those guys that has really had high expectations going in to replace, probably one of the best receivers we've seen in a long time. And then he has lived up to those expectations so far, I want to say.
Yeah.
And then on the defensive end, I think obviously you talk about all the DBs that are doing really well. I think we've seen quite a bit of production out of some of those guys on the defensive line too. J.R. Singleton has had 2 sacks on that interior and has been stuffing runs quite a bit. And a kid who surprised me has been Trent Jones, who I believe he was a walk-on, and he he's pretty much started every single, or maybe not started, but played in like every single game at this point. And he's in that like second group with Dom Orange, and seeing like Dom and Trent Jones together rushing at the quarterback has been just like, they're the ones who are pretty much putting fear into opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the defensive line a lot, and I feel like I kind of dog on them a little bit too much, because it feels like all I want is just for them to get like 3 sacks a game, which, it's not going to be the case, like you said, with them using that 3-3-5 defense. But yeah, I mean, Trent Jones, Dom Orange, J.R. Singleton, the list goes on and on about, defensive linemen who, the numbers might not stick out to you, but they have made some big plays, and they've really helped out. There was a couple games like, the Oklahoma game, and then even the win against Oklahoma State, they didn't play their best. They got into kind of a rut in the season after being really solid through the first couple of games. But yeah, defensively, I think the defensive line has stepped up, and we can talk about the obvious star in Jeremiah Cooper with his 5 picks, and I think he just really came out of nowhere. I talked to him a little bit in the beginning of the season about, he was dealing with injuries the year before, and for him to really be at his healthiest, I think him and Eli Sanders complement each other in the terms of their story at Iowa State. They really just needed to stay on the field, and they've really just proved why, they are a top player on this team, and really for one of them, a top player in the nation.
Yeah, especially for Cooper. I mean, he's obviously leading the nation in interceptions, but I think after that first game, I mean, going into it, we were like, oh, he's one of those guys that's also in the DB room who's going to probably do some good stuff. but then he gets 2 picks against UNI, and you're like, oh, okay, yep, this is how it's going to be this year. And so far, he's pretty much just he almost to me has been like Trayvon Diggs. You know, he knows where the ball is, and he's going to get to it. And I think creating those turnovers has been just crucial in some of these victories for Iowa State. Yeah,
and I mean, it's always nice to have a guy that has like pretty much like a nose for the ball. You can't really throw it up and just pray that, you know, your receiver's going to make a play on the ball. And his interceptions have come in really different spots. I mean, that first, you know, pick six that he had against UNI, he jumps the route perfectly. And then, you know, you have that where, you know, that's just a perfect play by the corner or by a safety, I guess. And then you have the interception against in the Cincinnati game where he's just tracking the ball the whole way on that Hail Mary and goes right to him. So, yeah, I think I'd like to actually talk about him a little bit more and just find out kind of what his mechanics are as a safety, because he's a safety that pretty much just kind of plays like a DB when he jumps the routes. But yeah, I think he has definitely proven himself as one of the best, you know, ball hawks in the country.
Yeah, you talk about that pick against Cincinnati, and that was funny because when that ball was released, I remember I saw the ball floating, and I was like, oh, that's getting picked. And I looked down, I was like, who's even running close to it? I was like, oh, number 4. I'm like, that's going right to Cooper. And that was probably before it even hit its top.
Right.
And then I went to Cooper, and I was like, oh, yep, yeah, that's to be expected. So it was one of those, like, he's just kind of like sitting there for it almost.
Yeah, I mean, the half was over, so it didn't really matter that much. But hey, I mean,
a pick is a pick.
Yeah, a pick's a pick. You're gonna get those where, you know, it just doesn't really matter entirely. But I think he's just been one of those awesome guys. And like you said, I think we kind of underrated him going into the season. Like, oh, he's just gonna be another guy in the DB room where he might make a couple plays, but you know, he's just fairly surprised, I think, both of us. And then a guy that surprised me on the offensive side, I mean, it's probably Benjamin Brahmer, who's made a lot of, you know, we didn't even talk about it in this Cincinnati game, but he drops a one-handed catch going into the end zone, which Rocco Beck said, you know, he probably could have put a better ball on him. But then for Beck to not just keep looking at Brahmer, but for Brahmer he's in the middle of the end zone on the, I believe this was in the third quarter, and he just makes a full extension for that ball. I mean, I think as a true freshman tight end, he's really taken over the role that Easton Dean was supposed to have. And Brahmer's just been really big for this team and has really surprised me because, you know, you look at true freshmen, I'm just very surprised that he's made this kind of jump, especially as a true freshman. Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of true freshmen that have been, you know, really good pieces for this team. And I think that's a good thing going forward, especially through the rest of the schedule. And we look at, you know, Iowa State is honestly on the cusp of a bowl game at this point. And going forward, I think seeing this constant growth and seeing the production from people you wouldn't expect is a good sign just for the depth of the team.
Right. And, you know, all the guys that we've mentioned, it's not like, I mean, is TJ Tampa's a senior, so this will be is this his last year?
I believe so.
So, you know, you might lose Tampa next year, but then you got guys like, you know, I think Purchase is a junior, Jeremiah Cooper is a sophomore, and that's just on the defense side. I'm not sure about Freeler, but overall, you have a very young team that sits in 4-3 through 7 games. I mean, I think that's just crazy to me. And you have a team that, you know, as young as they are, has the chances of making a bowl game if they get 2 or 3 more wins, which for their next 5, the rest of their 5 games looks very doable.
Yeah. And we can go through them. I think, you know, getting 2 more wins probably won't be too difficult. You know, you start at Baylor on the road, and Baylor has been one of those teams that has been kind of wishy-washy to the point where I think it depends on which Baylor you're seeing. But I think even at Baylor's best, if Iowa State goes out there and plays the ball that we have been seeing, I think they have a really good shot of taking down Baylor.
Yeah, so that gets you to 5 wins. And then after that, you have Kansas at home, who Kansas just had a major blunder on the road against Oklahoma State. And if you want to stand...
I'm still under the impression that nobody can win at Oklahoma State because they've now taken down like 2 teams they probably should not have beat at home. And it's, I don't know. But I think, you know, it's a homecoming game against Kansas. So, you know, we'll kind of see how that one plays out.
And the Jack Trice game kind of felt like a homecoming game. So if it's the same atmosphere there, I mean, and you can get up early, kind of like how they did against TCU, could be the same result. But then you go on the road to BYU, who has kind of been up and down the season, kind of like Cincinnati, but with more ups for BYU. You go to Provo for the first time. That's going to be interesting. And then you come back and you have a major opportunity against currently number 8 ranked Texas at home, which, like I said, Ewer is probably one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. Definitely the second best that they're going to face this season. And then the final game, Kansas State. That's going to be interesting to see.
On the road.
Yeah. So I agree with what you're saying, though. 2 more wins to get on the cusp of bowl contention. It seems pretty doable. Actually, I was looking today at The Athletic, and The Athletic has Iowa State in the Texas Bowl, was called, but it's the Tax Act Bowl, I believe it's actually called, against Texas A&M. So,
I think that if they do play Texas A&M, that could be a difficult game to win.
Yeah, especially when you're going up against SEC ball.
Yeah, it is a bowl game's a bowl game, though. I think you talk about BYU being one of those games that, I have BYU's schedule pulled up here. I remember last week they got destroyed by TCU.
Yeah.
And, Iowa State, you'll say, Iowa State beat TCU. So, I mean, hey, there you go.
Right.
That means they can beat BYU. But I think BYU does seem beatable, especially with the fact that they barely beat Cincinnati at home. And then, they did beat Kansas, but that was earlier. And I want to say that was kind of an off week for Kansas almost. So it really is the same story with Baylor of which team do we kind of see out of BYU. And
this is also a team that only scored 2 touchdowns against Sam Houston to open up the year. Yes. And when you look back at that Cincinnati BYU game, I want to say they had to they almost blew it, actually. I'm looking at right here, at one point they were up 28-13 in the third quarter, and then they give up, they get that touchdown to, get them back to 35 after they let Cincinnati score a touchdown. But, a 27-35 game, that's an 8-point game. I think, like you said, they were just kind of it was an off week for Cincinnati. But that is probably the game that I'm looking forward to the most. I know that Kansas is a solid team. Baylor hasn't been great, but, they're still definitely capable of, having those upsets. And they were really close to beating UCF until they blew that. So I think it's all about just Iowa State not blowing a lead, especially when you're going to Provo for that, for your second to last road game of the season.
Yeah, and I think... you look at the final few games, I think I don't want to mark them in as a bowl game yet, because I think all of these are both winnable and losable games. So I think they really just kind of have to lock in and realize that they need to win some of these games. They can't go into these like they did to Ohio almost and being like, okay, well, we have the momentum. We, are favored to win this. We might as well just go out there and play like we usually do. But then, so if they don't lock in though, a bowl game is going to be kind of a long shot.
Yeah. And, we're talking about, just being a bowl game, but if you're looking at the super optimistic side of it and you only drop your one game to Texas and you win, let's see what we got. You win 4 of your last 5 games. I mean, that would be crazy. But I think at this point, when, there were some people like you that thought that a bowl game was nowhere near their, what they were capable of doing. I think it's just, it's been crazy to watch this, a little bit of a roller coaster of a season. But, if we're looking at this team in terms of a roller coaster, looks like you're just about to go down, or looks like you're just still on that first hill when your stomach's about to drop.
Yeah, hopefully my stomach doesn't drop after watching them against Kansas homecoming week.
Or Baylor. Like I said, Baylor's a sneaky team. I think they might.
That's true.
And on the road after a bye. But I thought I saw a stat that Iowa State's actually been pretty decent on the bye in the Matt Campbell era. So, he probably is going to, that'll be an interesting thing that we can, ask Campbell about on Tuesday, is just, how you really prepare a team for a bye. Because, this is whether, it doesn't really matter whether it's college or the NFL, you have a bye week. What do you really do to kind of get your head right, especially when Iowa State is at a point in the season where it's do or die time in terms of getting to a bowl game?
Yeah, and they have so much momentum now. They definitely just don't want to lose that over the bye week.
Yeah, because if you can go into Kansas and you are, you're on a 3-game win streak, and then you win that, you go on the road to BYU. Let's say you win that, you've won 4 straight games hosting Texas. Again, it's just all
That'd be 5 then, huh?
Yeah. Well,
if they beat Baylor, Kansas, and BYU.
5. They'd be on a 5-game win streak.
That'd be pretty good.
That'd be insane. One that I did not think was capable at the beginning of this season. But yeah, like you said, it's just all about getting the mind right and staying ready during this bye week.
Yeah. So going into this bye week, we'll have a lot more to look forward to. After they're out of it, we'll have Matt Campbell next week. He'll kind of tell us how the team's sitting. Hopefully everybody's healthy. Hopefully everybody's ready to go.
Right.
Hopefully they didn't take the bye week too seriously and just do nothing. But for now, we will be back next week. Maybe not giving you guys updates on what happened during the bye, but talking about Baylor, and we'll be scouting them out, seeing what their chances are, more in depth what their chances are at these upcoming games.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching.